Start recording.
Okay.
Okay. Should I stop recording? Yeah, with the morning rush, dropping kids to school feels like a longer commute than driving to work. What PG said in the chat.
Yeah. I notice if you get to campus after 8:15, it gets a little tough to navigate the parking lots. But getting my kids out at 7:30 doesn't always happen. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Miss Davis is at a conference right now, so we are taking over, but this is our area of expertise for some of us personally and professionally. And so we're going to talk a little bit about just mental health in general, but specifically depression and suicide.
Second, I forgot how to present on Google Slides. But for those of you who don't know us, I'm Kayla Marshall. I'm one of the school social workers.
I'm Yvonne Gunter. I'm one of the school social workers.
Do I go?
Yeah,
Parent and community involvement specialist.
Yes. And for those of you that don't know, Mr. Rosales, pretty much point person for any questions. If he doesn't have the answer, he knows who to ask. So make sure that you're always reaching out if you need to. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to start this one. I tell students all the time, like the reason why I'm in this field is because I struggled so much in high school with my mental health. And, I like to be the light for when they can't see through that darkness of just like assuring them that they're going to be okay. And when I was in high school, my thing was really debilitating anxiety. And so that's always kind of been my area. And so I would, as I've gone through school, I learned about depression and talk about depression, but until I was in my 30s, I had never actually gone through depression. So my perspective of depression has changed dramatically after my own personal experience. And so one of the things I really want to convey is that no matter how I attempt to articulate it, it's so difficult to describe the depth of despair that somebody feels when they're going through depression. And of course, there's different levels of depression. There's, more severe, there's more moderate depression. And so we'll cover that a bit, but, until I had my own personal experience, I did not realize how physical, mental, emotional depression is. I remember feeling every single morning that I got out of bed that I had 100 pounds of cinder blocks on my back and literally couldn't pull myself out of bed. It was very physical. I had aches and pains, and it just overall felt horrible. So a lot of times we think about depression as just being sadness, just being a lack of motivation, but there's so much more to it. And so when I think back about how I felt during that time of my life, and then I think about our students who are feeling that way and trying to get through high school, I have just this tremendous amount of empathy and compassion for them because, I had a hard time just functioning. There were days where it was okay, as long as you can get in the shower, you're good. So to think that our students might feel this way and still have to do all the responsibilities, all the things that they're doing, I applaud them for being able to do that because that's quite the feat. And so a little bit about what I want to share is just how do we support our kids? How do we get support? And we'll talk a little bit more in depth. Go ahead, Kayla. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll take it. So when we're looking at their stage of development, I think it's easy for us to forget that they're still developing, that their brain is still changing. Sometimes they are acting like they are hormonal teenagers or that they are still developing, but sometimes they have gone through life in a way where they have had to grow up. And I know we meet a lot of students who have a lot of maturity and who can hold conversations with adults very easily. So it's important for us to stay aware that their brain is still developing. I think, isn't it until age 25, your brain is still developing? Correct me if I'm wrong. But this is one of the most difficult stages of development just because of so much change, and not just the change, but the awareness, right? They're entering the world where they are aware of like their future. They're having to plan for college. They're having to plan for maybe not college, anything that comes after, any trade school or just working. And I think we have a pretty competitive school where there's a lot of peer competition, I guess.
Yeah. One of my favorite conversations to have with freshmen is I'll ask them, like, what are you going to do when you grow up? And they like they're supposed to know, right? And when they don't have an answer, I say, I'm just saying that you really don't need to know right now. Like, you have so much time. It's going to be okay. And I can literally see their shoulders come down, get a full breath in, and feel a sense of relief because they came here thinking that they're supposed to have it all figured out. And as we know, that doesn't actually happen. It's not necessary, but just that feeling of pressure at this time in their life is just overwhelming.
Right. And that's the social part of their development, where there's the physiological element of like their hormones are totally ramped up. They're going through all the developmental changes, physical changes in their body, and kind of navigating that and how the world reacts to them. And specifically like how hormones impact their brain response to stress. This isn't my area of expertise, but I think it's fair that we all know that stress hormones affect how we react, how we function, how we are able to focus and complete tasks. So in addition to the social, in addition to the physiological, the psychological changes, there's, what is it? Is it Erickson's stages of development? I forget who.
I think it is.
As in teenage years, they're supposed to be separating themselves from their family, not entirely, but finding their own independence, making sure that they are creating themselves as an individual and not just part of their family unit anymore. This is when a lot of experimenting or self-questioning comes into play, where they're just exploring who they want to be. I'm going to move on. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Oh yeah. Brain is not fully developed until the early 20s.
Yeah.
And I think we talk about this a lot with substance use and, alcohol abuse and things like that, where using those early on can really impact the brain as it's not fully developed. But yeah.
You could, next slide.
Get this one.
And we can share this if you want to read more about it.
Yeah. Brain development.
More about it. So when we think about our kiddos with depression, a lot of times I will call home and be like, hey, I had an appointment with your child. We did what we call a PHQ-9, which is a patient health questionnaire. We found out that your kid is scoring at levels of moderate to severe depression. And a lot of parents will feel like this is news to me. This is totally novel information. I had no idea. And that's why we really want to detail like what depression looks like, what it looks like in teenagers. I do see difference of symptoms with teenage boys versus teenage girls. So just wanting all of us to have the awareness of what might that look like. So maybe it doesn't look like anything, but maybe you've heard your child say something to the effect of, I'm depressed, I can't stop crying, I'm feeling super emotional for no reason, I'm so stressed out, I can't take it. You don't understand how I feel. I've learned that my adolescence is very different than my kids, and they're right. I don't understand what it's like to be a teenager with a phone. I don't understand what it's like to be a teenager in a competitive high school. So just validating that, like, you're right, I don't know, but I'm here to support you. Life just isn't worthwhile. I don't want to do this anymore. I can't make it. Like any sort of, sentences like that you would hear from your kid. Have you heard your kids say that? I definitely have.
Yeah. I think also
babies are, go ahead.
I want to also acknowledge that like we have a very like multicultural, like we live in a very multicultural area in San Jose. And I think the impression of what depression or what sadness looks like across different cultures and how we talk about it. And I think we really trust parents' intuition if they notice things in their kids where maybe they're sleeping different, they're acting different, but not really knowing how to talk about it in a way that is like talking about depression. Just acknowledging that you all know what's happening with your kid, and just because maybe you don't want to, like, use the term depression, or maybe that's not a common word used for you, doesn't mean that they're not experiencing something pretty severe.
That's a great point.
Sorry, I know you had a question for Rupert.
Oh, no, I was just going to say his babies are little yet. So I don't know what kind of conversations you have around mental health, if any, yet. I know they're tiny.
Yeah, I haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
And then I have boys, so it's kind of easier to talk to, I guess. And there's no gap in how we conversate, so I haven't got there yet. High
Yeah.
school's coming though.
Totally. But you start with talking about feelings, I'm sure, you know.
I kind of more tease them about girls, but that's about it.
Of course. Do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, I realize I muted myself because I wanted to unwrap something.
So this could be a question for just ourselves. And you could think back when you were in high school, you can think back about now. There's no need to like put your answers in the chat or anything like that. But just these are the signs of depression. And so maybe there's been a time in your life where you felt this. Maybe you weren't diagnosed with depression. Maybe you had a time where you were a little bit off, but these might be some of the things that would have popped up for you had you been experiencing depression. There's something called anhedonia, and basically that means loss of pleasure. So like if I used to love roller skating, and nobody roller skates anymore, and I don't really find joy in it anymore, that would be anhedonia. Like I just don't feel those heights in my like mood anymore. I'll hear students say like, I used to skateboard, but now it's just like, meh, whatever. Or even hanging out with my friends, it's just like, whatever. So I don't enjoy doing the things I used to enjoy. That's a huge sign. So if you have a student who maybe had a hobby and you just don't see them doing that anymore, sometimes it's about time, but sometimes it's just about not feeling that same joy. I just want to roll over in the morning and stay in bed all day. That's me today, actually, but I don't know if that's depression or just because it was cold and rainy. Getting out of bed is hard. There's something about mornings and depression where it seems to hit the hardest. And it's almost like you feel like an old car that just needs time to warm up. So maybe that's something that you felt. I don't want to eat, or I can't stop eating lately. Changes in our, eating patterns and our appetite. And just a side note, these feelings are the things that would come up on that PHQ-9 I was talking about, that health screener. These are all just ways of saying like what they ask on that thing. Like, have you had a decrease or increase appetite? Are you having a hard time falling asleep, staying asleep, or maybe even sleeping too much? Those are questions that would be on that form. So this is just like a more casual way of saying them. I don't care about anything or anyone anymore. I feel worthless. The question I think is like, have you felt worthless, hopeless, and I can't remember what the other one is. But just questions like that, those feelings of just, I don't feel important. I just don't feel like I care about anything. I feel irritable and frustrated, and I feel like nothing will ever get better. When you're in a depression, the best way I could describe it would be like as if a black cloud is just over your line of vision, over your head. It just feels very heavy, and there can be so many wonderful things around you, and your brain just cannot process that joy the same way. So these are things that, maybe you felt this, maybe you've gone through depression, maybe that's something that you've experienced, or maybe these are things that you've seen in your own child. Next slide, Kayla.
I think Virginia has their hand raised.
Good morning, everyone. So I would like to disagree with Rupert. Boys are not easy. I have 4 of them. And the reason why I say this is because I must admit, boys have these same feelings, but society doesn't accept them the same. So it is a lot tougher. When you have these feelings of, I don't feel like doing anything, or I just feel down, what do they say? Oh, a girl's PMSing. Oh, a girl's this, a girl's sensitive, all that stuff. But a boy in society is not allowed to have these feelings. So it's really difficult. And I feel like these topics are harder to talk to with the boy because of the fact that we can't tell them it's okay, because society doesn't see that as okay, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So I can say it's okay to have a bad day, because you know the friends are gonna be like, bro, what's wrong with you? Bro, why are you why are you being a little girl for? Why are you doing, so
Yeah.
it is tough. It is tough. And I'm going through that myself as a parent.
Yeah.
And it's hard for my teen to, he can come to me and cry. He can come, but he can't show that to his peers, or they'll be like, bro, why weren't you here yesterday? He can't, I understand it, but he can't go to them, and we have to make up some sort of story. And so it is very difficult dealing with a lot of feelings, because it seems like feelings are accepted by girls, from girls instead of boys.
So true.
Yeah, like if you're sad and you miss school because you're sad, you're a wuss, you're all these things. And I have 3 boys. I don't have daughters, so I don't really know from that perspective. But from my boys, even when my kids have gone through depression or anxiety, the way that they talk to each other, in their mind, they're encouraging each other, right? Of like, get up, dude, what are you weak, And it creates that feeling of like, I'm not supposed to feel this way, and it's not okay that I feel this way. And I think, talking about feelings from a very young age can be super helpful. I wish I would have done a better job at that when my kids were young, because it is a really tough thing to handle. I'm thankful now, as my kids have gotten older and they've gotten some support, that they're a little more verbal about what they experienced. But in general, it does make them feel weak, and that is societal. It could be cultural, it could be societal. I grew up in a family where my mom was very tough. My mom is the person who, she had kidney cancer a few years ago, and I was like freaked out about it. And she's like, relax, Yvonne, I have 2. Like, that's my mom. She's like, toughen up, like, you could do this, like, stop being a wuss. And so having depression with a mom like I had, she was super supportive, but I didn't feel like I was supposed to express that weakness to this day, right? Like, she can just have her kidney taken out and it's all good. And I'm just like crying over a bad day, right? Like, it's just totally different. So I think the more we normalize talking about feelings and not being okay, hopefully, we can perpetuate that as in our society.
Right. I think the people that I've met with, the students that I meet with one-on-one, a lot of the times the boys will say like they can share all these things with maybe like their girlfriends, their girlfriends and their friends who are girls, but like they would never tell their guy friends like what's going on. And that's for us to break. That's like each generation needs to kind of work on that, chip away at that, because that's a long time built up. But yeah, I think that's why that leads to a lot of other things. I know we'll be talking about suicide later in this presentation, and men have higher rates of suicide, higher rates of completed suicide than women, I think, for that reason. Depression looks different amongst genders for a specific reason. I appreciate that.
Rupert, said also for adults, that is very true. It happens here in my household. So I have a son who suffers depression, and I'm understanding, and I have a husband who is a male who's of a different generation and doesn't quite understand that. And he's like, why are you babying him? Why? And I'm like, this is a different, so it even happens here within our own household. It can be tough, so I can only imagine what it's like, with peers and, out in society.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Virginia.
It would be difficult for us to have a depression group for boys. I would be shocked how many people might sign up.
Yeah.
Next slide.
I'm not sure we should try that.
Me neither.
But like, we might get 1 or 2 kids that like at least walk in the door and then walk out, so we can at least be like, oh yeah, let's talk to that guy later.
Yeah, that may work. I agree with you, Rupert. As my son, he prefers the one-on-one instead of the group, because like he says, you just kind of, especially when you're at school and you kind of see your peers walk in, but there's a lot of people who are willing to do it, just maybe not in a group.
Yeah, one of my greatest joys when I'm in sessions with kids is of course, I have 3 sons, so I do have a soft spot for the boys. You know, my boys are all teenagers, and I have boys that will come in here and be talking about their feelings and have a giant stuffed animal on their lap that they're hugging. And that is like my softest spot, because it's like they want that validation about their feelings. They want to be able to express that, and to have a place where they feel safe to do it. Like, it's a total honor, but it's like the sweetest thing. And I wish we had more opportunity for boys to be able to express themselves in that way.
I think we should have a group.
I'm
I
like,
think
now that we're talking about it, I'm like, wow, it's
all the
so,
more reason to, right? To
Yeah.
have them connected at least to their friends, or like people they don't even know, but people who are experiencing the same thing.
100%.
I don't think we should count that out.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe Rupert should head that.
I think so too. Rupert would be awesome.
It was a great idea.
We did do something like that when we had the first when Pastor Danny was running City Peace.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We kind of, they didn't know they were sharing their feelings, but we were asking, you ask the right questions, you get the right answer.
Totally.
Kind of sometimes. But we kind of strayed away of what the core group was. So I think if we identify the students who may work in a group, it would be more welcomed.
Mhm.
I am from that generation, like, oh, do you want an earring? Oh, you want a dress too? And all that.
Mhm.
And I have long hair. Like, my uncles probably wouldn't have always allowed that kind of, or teased me for it. But I was raised by a single mother, so I don't really have the gender norms. I kind of think it's silly when people kind of tell you those things, because there's no basis for it. They're just kind of and it's generational, right? It's like stuff people were told. And then, like, when you're a male, you kind of learn that not everybody, there's not truth to everything everybody says. And you kind of learn, like, there's a lot of testosterone and there's a lot of ego. So you kind of learn, like, these are my friends, these are your friends. I don't like what was said, but as a parent, you take all that into effect. And it kind of makes it who you're going to be as a parent, father. Not having a father, I kind of overplayed the role of a father, because I didn't really necessarily know what I was doing. So I wanted to be the best father I could be. Um, I haven't got to the teenage son yet. I haven't got to, like, you'll never understand, dad, kind of thrown in my face. But I don't think that that's something that's going to be harder for me.
Mhm.
I would like to hope so. I guess we all kind of tell ourselves that until we get into that situation. But yeah, I do think a male group would work, and it probably would benefit a few amount of kids.
Absolutely.
Even
Especially
if we end up
when
with a
going to,
2-person group.
I'm speaking just from the Latino Hispanic male. The Asian communities are probably even more stricter on what a male is supposed to be and what is I can't speak for other cultures, but I do think it's not just limited to myself or my background.
Yeah. If
So we
anybody
might
has any context of that, of like what the experience in your culture has been in regards to talking about mental illness, or males talking specifically about feelings, things like that, like, please feel free to share with and enlighten us, because it helps me in my work with kids to have that context.
Yeah, I think that's something we're missing, like, because it's everything. Like, I always say, everything's either cultural or regional,
For sure.
and I think this is something that's highly cultural, highly, like, something that's not really talked about, I guess.
100%. So we're going to go into, like, what is depression? I think we kind of established this, but it is by definition, a common and serious medical illness that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, and how you act. And I love that it's actually, the way I'm reading it, it's like bold, like, medical illness. We don't think of it as something that is, we think about, like, you have the flu, you have cancer, you have all these things that you don't have control over. And depression is in that same category. It's a medical illness, something going on within your body. As I stated before, there's different levels of depression. There's moderate depression, there's major depression. Dysthymia is kind of like this, like, how would you describe dysthymia? Kind of like this
It's like low mood, just
Low
there's
mood
nothing,
all the
I
time.
think
Like
we
just
think of like major depression as like a big dip, but
Mm.
dysthymia is just kind of like you were saying earlier, that kind of like lack of interest, just kind of
yeah.
barely hanging on, maybe like that, that feeling of like you're just kind of a shell.
Yes.
Um,
I have like I'll always have students like, rate their feelings, how they're feeling like 1 to 10. And anytime somebody says like 5, it's just like you're just kind of existing, but you're
Mhm.
not like excited about it. You're just kind of, the kids would say like meh. You're just kind of meh. So all the different types of depression, they all include that feeling of sadness. And to diagnose depression, there's a whole list of criteria, and it does go back into that like appetite loss, difficulty concentrating, feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, sleep issues, isolating, connecting with people, like having the inability or the not the desire to do that.
I think we also like there's a difference between like depression and sadness, where the sadness has like kind of a little expiration date on it, or maybe something that led, like a breakup or anything, a loss of someone comes with sadness. Depression doesn't always have like an instigator for it.
Yeah.
And I think it can look different. Like all the symptoms that Yvonne's listing, we could see someone walking down the hall that just kind of looks like they have a cloud over their head, or like, oh, that person maybe has depression. There might be someone star of sports teams, in the school play, laughing with their friends, and still have the same symptoms of loss of sleep, loss of interest, all those same things.
Yeah, I actually had the perfect experience happen on the way to my office this morning. And I had a student that wanted me to share with their teachers that they had been feeling depressed. And so I bumped into one of the teachers and I said, yeah, so-and-so wanted me to just let you know that they're going through a depression. And the first question was, why? Why are they going through depression? And so some depression is situational, right? It is something happened, somebody passed away, I had a breakup. But a lot of the time, it just is. And when we ask our students, why are you depressed? And they don't have an answer, it makes them feel broken, that there's something wrong with them. A lot of times we'll say things like, I'll hear that families will say things like, we give you everything, you have one job, we've done everything for you. And it becomes about the parent, right? And it's like, it doesn't matter. You see celebrities who from the outside have all these wonderful things and all these, friends and all this fabulousness, and it doesn't matter. It's like depression doesn't care how supportive your family is, doesn't care about how much money you have, like what your status in life is. It doesn't matter. And so when people are feeling depressed, I always caution like to ask the why. Maybe there is a why, but it really is a difficult question to hear because it makes you feel frustrated. I remember people asking me and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I know everything's great. I know I have this wonderful family. I don't know. And so just keeping that in mind of like depression sometimes is biological. Sometimes it's, there's a family history. Sometimes it just is hormonal. Sometimes it could be related to like a thyroid condition. Like I always want to make sure kids get medically cleared to make sure it's nothing vitamin related or iron related, or there's so many different reasons. But just knowing that for the majority of our students, it just is. 10 to 15% of teenagers have symptoms of depression. This slideshow was done pre-COVID, that maybe have changed by now, the percentages. But just
I was just thinking about that because it says, in 2012, 5% of teenagers, 2018, 15.
Yeah,
After 2020 to 2022, we had a huge uptake in students, and I'm sure you all saw it with your kids being at home all the time, just how lack of motivation, how much they had, and everything like that.
Yeah, COVID was like the perfect storm for depression. All of the things that have to be in alignment for things to go south were there. Isolation, lack of stimuli, sleep patterns, like all the things. And so, we're kind of still dealing with the aftermath, and we will be for years of what COVID did for kids' mental health and ours. That was tough.
We kind of covered this.
Yeah, we did. So, but that's just another snapshot of like all the things that.
I don't know that we talked much about like the physical symptoms, do we?
I think about like what was physical, like when I was feeling very, and I know I keep going back to myself, that's my only point of reference is like my own experience with it. It felt so physical. Like I felt like there's something wrong with me. I remember having this feeling of like, almost like I was wearing a headband like around my head that was so tight. The tension in my head was always there. It felt like I had a rubber band tied around my head, like that tension. Headaches, body aches, stomach aches, a heaviness in my chest, like a physical heaviness in my chest that I felt like weight was on top of me. One thing people will also say is like they feel like they're moving and kind of going through life very slowly. Like it's hard to just get moving.
And that's a question on the PHQ-9 is, I think, has anyone noticed you moving slower, or have you noticed yourself moving slower than usual?
Like the world just feels super, super slow. You can go to the next slide, kid.
Okay. And when should you be concerned? I think it's hard because so much of these symptoms can overlap with normal teenage growth and, you know, extra sleeping, or maybe they're staying up late talking to friends, and like where does that overlap if they're isolating, right? We talked in the beginning about like normal teenage development is that they don't want to be with family all the time, or they want to be with family a lot less than usual versus isolation. So, you know, these things can kind of go back and forth, a little seesaw.
Yeah, I think to trust your gut. I mean, it's like you do know your child better than anyone else. And I always tell students that when I have to call your parent and tell them you're experiencing depression, they're going to know something's off with you. And as a parent, I know that my imagination is usually worse than reality. So if I see my kid is off and he's not telling me anything, like I'm going to think the worst. And so trust your gut. You know your student, you know your kid, you know how they normally function, and just being aware of those changes. Any change in behavior over a long period of time. If you notice that they used to go to bed at 10 o'clock every night and now they're going to bed at 2, you know, check in, and maybe it's just they have extra work, but you know their patterns, you know their style, and just keep an eye out. A prolonged period is considered 2 weeks. So if you're noticing like, gosh, for the last couple of weeks, I noticed that when it's dinner time, she's not eating like she used to, or she used to come out and chit chat with us before we went to bed, and now she's just in her room with the door closed all the time. Like, again, some of it is like normal teenage behavior. Some of it is just moody. Sometimes our kids are brats. Sometimes they're lazy, right? But how do we I think that's the hard part, is like, how do we differentiate what's what? And I think the way to do that is, you know, how many symptoms are there? How dramatic is the change in behavior, and just keeping an eye that way. Because sometimes, yeah, depression can come off as I don't care or I'm lazy. But the reality is sometimes it's easier to just say that than to be able to express what you're really feeling. Kids are more comfortable saying, yeah, I don't really care, than I'm hurting, I'm scared, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling like I can't get out of bed. It's just easier to be like, whatever, I don't care.
I remember one experience in high school. My parents were going through a whole lot. I was in my own depression, but I kept a smile on my face. And I remember the counselor pulled me in and talked to me, and she's like, how's everything going? And I'm like, it's great. Things are great. And I remember her telling me, she's like, you're smiling, but your eyes are really sad. And I think like that hit me in the chest like a dagger, but I didn't share anything more with her. But just to acknowledge, she's like, I could see it. I know you're trying to cover it, but I can see what's happening.
Oh, that's so sad. It's so true, though. So much truth.
Because you could see it,
And man, can our kids fake it? I have kids that you would never, most of the kids that I work with that have depression, you would never even know. It's not the kid with their bangs over their eyes all the time and their head down on their desk. Sometimes it's, class president. Sometimes it's valedictorians. Like, you just don't know.
And I think partnered, like we're talking about suicide as well. This one's always hard to talk about.
I know.
So third leading cause of death in adolescence, things that can increase the risk, not getting help for anxiety or depression and leaving those symptoms. I think the challenge, sometimes we hear parents say like, this is a phase, they might get through it. And we know that the risk of leaving it untreated is much higher than whatever kind of copay or out-of-pocket expense might have from seeing a clinician. Alcohol and substance use. Sorry, I'll let you. No. What?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. Alcohol and substance use, right? It's kind of a catch-22. Like they might be using to escape those feelings. Those substances might make them more of a lethal person to themselves. Another high risk thing is having a previous attempt, no matter how big or small. I think we also see a lot of students who share attempts with us, previous attempts, where nobody knew about it. Like maybe they took more medicine than they should have, and they woke up fine, and parents didn't know the medicine was gone. Nobody knew. They woke up, they just went to school.
Yeah. I mean, we
yeah.
have numerous of those situations every month, every week. We have students who we find out, overtook medication, have been thinking about suicide very frequently. I wish I had a number for you about how many risk assessments, so just determining level of safety, which means we were given a referral about a student who talked about suicide, wrote about suicide, talked about not wanting to go on, not wanting to be here anymore. I can't even think of a number, to be fair. I've probably done 5 this week. And those are like legitimate concerns from other people. Sometimes they come from families, sometimes they come from peers, sometimes they come from teachers, sometimes it's a self-referral, like, hey, I'm having these feelings. But the amount that we do this is, between both of us, is a lot. Like, this is something that's so common. I remember hearing when I was younger, like, suicide is so selfish and I can't believe people do that. And it wasn't until I experienced depression that the thoughts of suicide started to make sense for me. And it is such a dark place that you have to imagine that when death feels like the better option, somebody's really suffering. And so I fully acknowledge that our kids go through some really, really dark times. We should give like a trigger warning for this slide. I forgot, like that it is heavy, and that, students, teenagers, we lose students, in our district, in our community. And so identifying this, it's like, we can't know all of the things, but the more we open up dialogue about depression and suicide, I think the more lives we're going to be able to save.
And they share with whoever they trust, like they might not talk to me or Yvonne, but they'll talk to Rupert, it just depends. I mean, we do our best, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know what this video is, so I don't know if I want to play it.
I don't know if I do either. Is it okay if I skip it?
Yeah.
Okay. By skip it, I mean torment you all by watching it. Sorry.
Well, resiliency varies greatly from child to child. This is huge. I hear this all the time, and even with my own kids. My first kid could get through whatever. Everything rolled off his back. He's easygoing. My younger kids, there's a little bit more struggle, a little more emotions, a little more, ability to be strong. And so we want to be very careful not to compare our children. They respond to stress differently. They respond to depression seriously. They respond to reality like differently. So being very careful and acknowledging that, like, all of our kids are different, just like all of us are different. Again, be mindful of comparing. It's helpful to know your child's capacity for stress and adjust expectations to align with your child's ability. Some kids are, driven to tears very easily. You can just barely tell them, like, hey, I'm kind of disappointed this happened, and they might be in tears. Other kids, maybe doesn't matter. So just being aware of like the differences in their ability to handle criticism, to handle those really hard conversations. Encourage your child to pace themselves and set realistic expectations for themselves. I am very guilty of coming down super hard on my youngest, and school is just not his thing the way it was for the other two. And so I have to remember, like, he's different. He, thrives in different ways. He stresses out in different ways, and just being aware that, like, all of our kids are so different. So we do have to interact with them in a different way, especially with sensitive topics like mental health and depression.
I think, again, acknowledging that our school can be really competitive just amongst peers. There's can be parent pressure, but oftentimes it's just kids comparing themselves to their friends and their classmates. I think we have many conversations with parents where we don't want students to take that extra AP class or join the club or be that class officer or something, because the kids might want to do that for themselves and feel the pressure, and but we know, like, we've seen them through their mental health journey, and acknowledging while they might have the support for something and have the capacity for something, we don't want their mental health to drop. I think we have more students than usual who will sacrifice themselves for their classmates or for their grades or for anything like that. So we want to really make sure that we're taking care of them by stopping them from doing certain things that we know might harm them. Like, they might push through to get that A, but if they're pulling all-nighters and it doesn't work out for them, it can be really damaging.
What can you do? This one, the top one sounds so easy. Oh, just talk to your kiddo. I tell people, and it's all the time, 3 kids at home that don't want to talk to me, hundreds at work that do. Sometimes you're the person for your kids, sometimes you're not. That doesn't stop me from, telling them things that they need to hear. But in general, I've been okay with my sons talking to my mom and my sons talking to my sister, because sometimes that's just their comfort level. But car ride is perfect because they're a captive audience. So sometimes I'll do my little conversations in there. I try to have conversations. Sometimes they're feeling it. Sometimes they've got their AirPods in or whatever. But it doesn't stop me from trying. Have honest conversations with your child about workload, expectations, stress, mental health, any noted concerns. It's always awkward, like, especially if we don't already have these conversations and then you're trying to bring up something new that you haven't talked to about them. It's awkward at first and all that stuff. I do it anyways. It is kind of awkward for them when I talk about like mental health, or they're like, oh, here you are being the social worker, but just being honest about it. Like, they know about my struggles, they know about my history, they know what I have to do to continue to be on a really healthy journey, and I model that for them. So however we handle our own stress, they're watching us. That's the best way that we can demonstrate how to take good care of ourselves. Knowing the warning signs of prolonged stress, anxiety, and depression, knowing that school is a trigger. School is difficult. Expectations on themselves are difficult. Peer pressure is difficult. Just giving them the space to talk about it. I say this probably in all my presentations, but just remembering when you are having conversations with your kiddos, the strategy that works the best for me to this day is asking my kid when they start talking, do you want me to listen? Do you want me to give advice? Or do you want me to be mad at somebody? And sometimes it fluctuates. Sometimes they're like, okay, give me advice, or listen and then give me advice and then be mad, or be mad and then give advice and then listen, whatever it is. The strategy also works on my husband. So you might want to try that too. Ask about suicide if you're worried. Normalize that those thoughts happen. People are afraid to come to a social worker and tell them they've had suicidal thoughts, because the idea is that we're going to put them in a hospital and take them away from their families and all these things. But with depression comes thoughts of suicide. There's different types of suicidal thoughts. There's passive thoughts, there's active thoughts. A passive thought would be those mornings where you wake up and you think, man, I wish I didn't wake up today. I wish I didn't have to get through this. I wish I wasn't here anymore. That's a passive thought. Very, very common in depression. An active thought would be having a very specific plan of how you're going to end your life. That's a little bit more worrisome, a lot more worrisome. But sometimes students have a combination of those. So make sure when you're talking about suicide, talk about thoughts. Talk about if you've had thoughts, if you've had those feelings. Develop a game plan to combat stress. Making sure kids have outlets, making sure they're balanced. I am guilty of only asking my kid how school was and not asking about his friends, not asking about his fun time, not asking about anything else that matters to him, of hyper focusing on school. That's kind of my comfort of asking that question. But when we only ask questions about school, what we're telling them is that's what we care about the most. When the reality is we care about their health and their safety the most. Encourage socialization. This is a hard one. When your kid's flunking classes, it's probably not our instinct to be like, go hang out with your friends, right? That's like, no, you're grounded, stay home. But really making sure that we realize that like interacting with other peers is something that's super healthy for them. So finding a balanced way they can do that and get their work done. Oh, look, recognize that your child needs balance in life. Taking a brain break, lots of questions that come up for us are like, what do you do with your kid that won't get off their phone? Like, how do you manage that? encourage stress relievers, go dark regarding screens. I turn my Wi-Fi off at 9 in the house. Their phones shut off at 9. They hate it. 9 o'clock is the time where all of a sudden they come out of their room and they want to chit chat. I'm like, do you really want to talk to me? Or are you bored now that I turned your phone off? Something in the chat.
Yeah, so VG shared, it's hard to get an adolescent's attention to engage any conversation. At our home, it mostly turns out becoming defensive. Parents in the room.
But yeah, how many of you have experienced that? Like, I'm just being annoying when I'm trying to talk, right? Or being a social worker, or, you know, it is hard to get their attention. So trying to figure out like what environments are the most comfortable for kids. For us, our thing, and it's kind of getting a little expensive, is we all jump in the car and we go get boba tea. And during those times are probably the best conversations I have with my kids. It is getting expensive, but it is a fun time. So getting them in that space where they feel like we're doing something fun and we're all hanging out and we'll have some really honest, deep conversations.
It's also good to just reflect back. I think for myself, if I'm trying to have a deep conversation like right after work or anything like that, I'm tapped out. So keeping in mind if we're talking to them after school, they're exhausted. Just giving them the right time that we would give ourselves. What you can say is, I think, always appreciating. I try to end every, session I have with a student, like thanking them for talking to me, acknowledging like how much I like appreciate their honesty. Always throwing out the question, is there anything I can do to help? Sometimes they have way more ideas. Maybe they have a really good direction for you to go in that you had no idea about. Just validating, I'm sorry to hear that. It must be tough. I'm here for you when you need me. Letting them come to you can be so valuable so that they don't get burnt out on you asking all the questions. Just the quick check-ins. How are you feeling today? And having that sincerity behind it. I've noticed some changes in you lately, wanted to check in with you. Even just you asking these questions, maybe they don't give you the full debrief that you're looking for, but we're always planting seeds that we are someone that they can talk to, that we're someone that cares. So maybe while they don't answer the first 5 times, maybe that 6th time they really can open up. How can I help you find help? I think also acknowledging like we're not always the person they want to talk to. Maybe it is someone outside the family, maybe it's someone inside the family, someone we didn't think about. Just also acknowledging feeling this way is not a sign of weakness, as we talk about, what it looks like across genders, what it looks like across cultures. It takes courage to speak up, and it does for anybody. I see a couple things in the chat. My daughter's a lot into social media, mostly about her appearance, like makeup and skincare routine. How do we deal with this? Is it wise to take their phone during the night?
That's a hot topic.
That is good.
Is it wise to take their phone at night? I've been doing it for years. I didn't start early enough because it was a huge fight in our house when it happened. I only have chargers in my bedroom, so kids have to charge their phone in my room. Do they probably sneak it? Yeah, like I'm sure. But generally speaking, I know, even for me, like I lay down in bed and I'm looking, honestly, I'm like scrolling through TikTok videos and I'm like, I wasted 2 hours of my life. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. So as my kids have gotten older, my oldest, he has like autonomy when it comes to his phone. He does get a good night's sleep and he realizes that he needs that. But I think when they're younger, like, I don't think they had the capacity to make that choice for themselves. I did it. I don't say that you have to or that you should. I personally do it. Not out of like control, but of like, I know that you don't have the wherewithal to understand that you really need the sleep right now. So I took that decision away from them. Do they hate me for it? Probably, but I'm okay with that. So I guess every family's different. I don't know. Anybody else feel the same way or differently even? Because I've seen the tantrums that come with taking a phone. You know, I've seen students threaten suicide when they get their phone taken away. So then parents feel like their hands are tied and they can't do those things. And so, you know, if that's your child's response to you taking their phone away, then we're probably dealing with the symptom of a bigger problem. What does Vincent say?
My kids still working on their homework or projects late. It's really challenging to take the phone off or turn the Wi-Fi off because they are working on homework really late. That is tough.
One.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's hard. I remember when my oldest was in high school, I still was like kind of in control of the Wi-Fi, and I told him it goes off at 11. So whatever you do before 11, as far as school goes, is up to you. If you're done at 11, great. If not, of course, there was some exceptions for big projects and finals and things like that. But generally speaking, it was actually helpful to show him that he needed to manage his time a little bit better. But it's a hard one because they need to be on there and they're communicating with their groups and all those things. But
Right. Yeah.
I
just want to flip through real quick just to see.
Yeah, actually, I really like the what not to say that slide because I was going to talk a little bit about toxic positivity. I know we only have a couple of minutes here. What not to say. One of the things that I'll hear a lot is, you know, our intentions are wonderful, right? Like, you're going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. Just stop thinking about it or stop stressing about it. Or, you know, that's kind of the language that students will hear in response to like, I'm feeling down or depressed. It could be worse. Yes, it could be worse, right? There's people who have it way worse, but we don't want to invalidate their feelings because they're real. Whether it's the biggest problem of the day or not, it's still their feelings. Snap out of it. Depression doesn't work that way. If they could, they would. We've all been there. Pull yourself together. Think happier thoughts. Don't talk about depression because it makes it worse. My favorite, you don't have anything to be depressed about. That may very well be true, but it doesn't change the fact that it's happening and that it's already happening, you know, that they're already in that moment. So just be very careful of those. Like, we're attempting to make them forget about it because that's our role as a parent, right? We want to fix it. But when it comes to depression, it's a lot deeper than that. And so just be very careful how we word our support, because sometimes it's not actually supportive in the long run. Good intentions, but not
Right.
the right thing to do. Go ahead, Kayla, whatever one you think.
I know, I think we talked about screen times. And just sleep. I think sleep is the last final.
Yeah, there's no therapist, psychiatrist, medication that is better than a full night of sleep. So kids will come to me and they're like, I'm just a disaster. And I'm sleeping 2 hours a night. I'm like, there's nothing professionally that I can do that's better than you getting a full night of sleep. And there's issues where children have like difficulty sleeping that you definitely should talk to the doctor about. Maybe they need something for, getting through that. But in general, sleep hygiene is humongous. If you think about the way we used to put our babies to sleep when they were little, we used to rock them and give them a warm bath and give them milk and have the process of reading books. And we had this whole routine. And then all of a sudden we're teenagers and they're doing their homework. And then the expectation is that their brain's going to shut off and they're going to fall right to sleep. We need our own process. That's what sleep hygiene is, like the time leading up to when we're supposed to be asleep. What are we doing with that time? Are we turning the lights down? Are we slowing down? Or are we attempting to jump from going 100 miles an hour into our bed? So helping your child come up with some sort of routine can be super helpful. Because again, this is the most important thing they can be doing.
Right.
We can't force them to sleep. We can force them in the room, but we can't force them to sleep.
Right. Good sleep hygiene, going to bed at the same time, making sure they have that routine. I think exercise is important. I've been like on my own sleep journey recently. And a lot of tips of like when you wake up, getting like some sunlight interaction before bed, like not exercising within like 2 hours before you go to sleep, because like the exercise lifts you up, gives you all the adrenaline hormones, all the things. But also exercising, getting like your body a little tired, keeping the temperature comfortable, like all these little things. It's actually supposed to be a little colder in your room than warmer to get you to go to sleep. Quiet. I know like we live in San Jose. It's not always the most quiet place, but as much as we can, using your bed only for sleep. I know a lot of students, like, they just go home, they're working in their bed, they're talking to their friends in their bed, like their bed is kind of like their whole home, as much as they have all the other space in their house. But yeah, as much as we can, kind of separating our work from our sleep. And just relaxation exercises, any kind of guided meditations, anything that might help just ease the mind before they go to bed.
Yeah, I think that's probably all we have time for. If anybody has any last minute questions, if you're noticing these things, do not hesitate to consult with us.
Mhm.
We can have a discussion about, is this something that's worrisome? If you have any questions about your child's behavior or their mood or anything like that, best way to get in touch with me is my email. I'll throw that in the chat.
And likewise with email. All right, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you all for being here. Yeah, have a great day. Let us know if you have any questions.